Good morning, afternoon, everybody. We're just populating the session here, so we're just going to give that a minute or so, and then we'll get kicked off here. So just bear with us for a moment. All right, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Cody Cochran with MBSI WAVE. Thank you all for joining us today. We're extremely excited to bring you our very first special edition Tech Talk today. All you need to know on spectrum fee changes here in Canada. I will be reviewing the agenda and introducing our speakers on the next slide. But before we get into that, just some quick housekeeping notes for everybody quickly here. So if you happen to have to step away or you want to share this content with somebody after we're done, we will be uploading it to all of our social media outlets shortly after we're all done today. So YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. You will be able to find a recording of this webinar. If you need a link, by all means, feel free to reach out to us and we will get that to you. Excuse me. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to drop them in the chat window as we move along. We are going to have a Q&A period at the end of the session, so please make it as interactive as possible. Any kind of questions you might have. So please do drop them in there. We definitely want this to be an interactive session. If that chat window does not open for you automatically, there is a little toggle button at the bottom of the window for you to open it. All right, so with that, let's make sure my slide's going to switch here. Not yet. There we go. All right, so our agenda today and our speakers that we're going to have. So we are going to start with the history of point-to-point microwave license fees. That's going to be done by our very own Dave Cleland. Then we will move into solutions, frequencies available, and why license microwave. That's going to be done by, again, our very own Paul Lefebvre. And then we're going to get into the nitty gritty on the updated fee structure. Finally, huge sigh of relief for a lot of folks in this industry. So Ryan Tabor is going to be taking us through that. We're also, after that, we're going to talk about the licensing process. That's going to be done by Matt Spruill. He's with Tango Networks joining us today. So thank you, Matt. Really appreciate you having you here today. And then I'm just going to be doing a quick wrap up at the very end. So with that, we're going to pass things over to Mr. Cleland. And he's going to get us going on the history of the license fees. So take it away, Dave.
All right. I'm unmuted and everything. I appear so. Okay, there we go. Got to click a bunch of times. There we are. Okay. So point-to-point microwave is relatively new in the scheme of things. Probably the Trans-Canada network started in the late 50s and through the 60s. It was predominantly a telco-based network. The equipment was very expensive. Branching networks and everything else are extremely difficult to engineer and put up for the average people. When I worked for for Alberta Government Telephones before TELUS was, we had whole groups that were dedicated to just making this video or this graphic that I've got on here work with the the various types of antennas, the various systems that it would take to get your long distance phone lines across Canada. Anyway, during the 90s, the cost of equipment began to fall. As things got to be smaller, more power efficient, the point-to-point world became available to other operators that could afford it. Up to that time, the telcos and maybe the power transmission companies, and just a few people were participating in the point-to-point world. Now, we're at the point in the 90s here where equipment is starting to become less expensive, and all outdoor equipment is starting to show up here. So now we don't need the branching networks and the dehydrators and all the other things that we need in order to take a waveguide up a tower. The telcos at the time, though, had their interests protected. If you were a private operator and you needed to get a system from one point to another, and there was a parallel tier 1 system in there, the licensing fees and structure tried to convince you to lease a line from the telco rather than put up your own network. You could license your own network, but very, very expensive. We'll see in a second here that it was a lot more money than what some people could make with their system. So ISPs, which would started to come into being right around the turn of the century here in 2000 and later, had one choice in the unlicensed spectrum, in the 5 gigahertz spectrum for their point-to-points. And so many operators have taken and used 5 gigahertz for both point-to-multipoint and point-to-point, which becomes problematic after a while. You run out of spectrum. So in the 90s, things got deregulated. The telcos privatized by and large. So, for example, the creation of TELUS and the merger of Edmonton Telephones and BC Tel all into one company. Long distance revenue was no longer the cash cow for the telcos. When cellular systems started to be deployed, long distance revenue long distance was just given away. It was part of the package. And so where, you know, a call would cost you, when you dial 1 in the area code in the 1980s, the call might cost you $5 or $10, or business was paying thousands of dollars for their long distance. Now, all of a sudden, that's not the case anymore. So, and at the same time as all this is going on, the fiber optic revolution strikes. The TransCanada Telco network moved from a point-to-point microwave to fiber optics almost overnight. So all of a sudden, here's the whole landscape is changing. At the same time, lots of private operators are beginning to enter the internet service world, and so there's big demand for point-to-points to backhaul internet from the distribution location sites and towers to back to their cores. So the structure, the licensing structure in the US, which is kind of the model here, was updated during the 2000s as AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, and others deregulated and abandoned their long distance networks also. Same fiber optic revolution. Point-to-point licensing in the US moved from a capacity-based fee structure, which to a spectrum-based fee structure, a consumption-based fee structure rather than capacity. And just for an example, from 2000 to 2015, there were 10,000 plus 80 gigahertz links built in New York City alone. So there's this point-to-point world just mushroomed in popularity and in demand. And up until this month, actually, Industry Canada has maintained the capacity-based point-to-point licensing structure, which of course is the change from that is the whole point of our webinar today. So one more slide I've got, just some fee models that we took a look at, some licensing that has happened in the past. So being that it's that it's based on throughput in megabits, not in the channel width or any spectrum actually occupied, we're talking about fees that range from many thousands of dollars, 20, 30, up to even $100,000 a year for a 10 gigabit link that would be used in 80 gigahertz. So we've got, you know, all sorts of, you see in the bottom line there, $131,000 was the annual fee per link for a 10 gig system because it was based on this capacity, the 64 kilobit channel equivalent. So maybe there are some of us that are on this call that are old enough to remember that the telco microwaves were all based on analog multiplexers that occupied 4 kilohertz per channel, and the multiples of these channels determined was the equivalent, the digital equivalent of this analog channel was the basis on which the fees were charged. So thankfully, we're moving away from that structure. Take it away, Paul.
Paul, you're muted just in case if we can't hear you yet.
Yeah, I am. I'm here. I had to, excuse me, I turned off my my video because my internet was lagging a little bit, but I'm good to go now. I appreciate the transition over to me. So the next subset of slides that we have here in the presentation is really just an opportunity to, break down where we stand today from what's available in licensed spectrum, as well as in a bit of an overview of some of the upper spectrum range. For those on the call, some of this could be treated as a bit of a refresher, and for some of on the call, this certainly could be treated as somewhat of an educational session. But we want to at least take the opportunity to sort of outline where things sit today, and what opportunities we have using the spectrum that we have available to us. So from a spectrum standpoint, the chart that's on the screen, sorry, technical difficulties. Represents I guess a spectrum chart, and if you do searches, there's a lot of options of charts like this out there, but this one I think probably simplifies it the most. So working sort of left to right, we can see that the first little subsegment of this chart is what we would call the sub-6 gig bands, the unlicensed frequencies 2, 4, 5, 8. 3 gigahertz spectrum, basically a world where a number of operators and a number of manufacturers have effectively made their living. Outside of those traditional bands, that's typically where we get into, a little bit more regulated spectrum. And in Canada today, so from a point-to-point standpoint, we have a frequency range in the 6 to 42 gigahertz range. And from a point-to-point standpoint, we have access to 6 gigahertz, 11 gigahertz, 13, 15, 18, 23 gig. And we're starting to see some traction in 32 gigahertz from a point-to-point standpoint. And these are your licensed microwave spectrum, typically referred to as, fixed wireless backhaul. Moving further up, we see a set of frequencies targeted for 60 gigahertz. This is your typical unlicensed spectrum where you see 802.11 AD and more recently AY products that kind of fall into Terragraph and that type of solution set with Facebook. We're going to kind of put that aside for today and focus more on what's regulated in the industry. And directly to the right of that is we have this tranche of 70 and 80 gigahertz, what we call millimeter wave E-band spectrum. And this is typically your short haul. Generally, as a rule of thumb, going left to right, the lower the frequency is, the longer the distance you would get off of paths. The higher the frequency, the bigger channel size we have available and the more capacity that we have available to us. If, going a little bit more granular, focusing, primarily right now on licensed microwave, and, it would be safe to say that, we could do a whole presentation on licensed microwave. We could do a whole presentation on E-band. The intent here is just to consolidate and, have an understanding of where it fits from a solution standpoint and how the changes in spectrum policy and costing have, given this a bit of a boost for use in Canada. But effectively, you know, licensed microwave link systems are engineered to provide multi-gigabit speeds with carrier-grade reliability and predictable availability with no interference. And, you know, if I were to break down some of those underlying words just to kind of, you know, set the stage, as Dave mentioned, right, the point-to-point licensed microwave world, you know, historically has been a telco-driven application. Big telcos use these style of radios. You know, the class of radios that they traditionally use in their networks get effectively put into this carrier-grade reliability category. I would be here to say that, you know, there could be some misconceptions in terms of the class of radios that big telcos use versus the class of radios that are available today in our, you know, in the markets that we serve with our customer base. The class of radios that we work with are 100% carrier grade, going down from R&D teams, engineering teams, how they build their radios, how they harden their radios. They have minimized point of failure. And, you know, you could ask any manufacturer in the market today to provide you with, you know, their MTBF stats, mean time before failure, just to get a sense of how they build their radios. Are they built for the long term? And, you know, the short answer is absolutely yes. You know, when you're looking at a licensed microwave solution, your first item on the checklist is I'm dealing with something that I know will be highly reliable. The second kind of term that gets used when you're dealing with licensed microwave is the concept of availability. The idea of what is my uptime should I expect on my radio due to atmospheric, physics, all of those elements, rain, fade. And, you know, we have some charts after my section that kind of get into that. But effectively, the nice thing about licensed microwave is that it is a highly predictable spectrum to use, you know, based on either the modeling tools that are available, using historical rain data. We can determine with almost, you know, 100% certainty in terms of how will this perform. And what that allows is network operators or consumers or enterprise customers to understand what should be the predicted performance of their solution that they are putting up. And once you have an idea of what your predicted performance should be, you also have an opportunity to understand what kind of service level you can provide on the other end of that. So that's, you know, the second nice thing with regards to licensed microwave is it's highly, highly predictable. The third kind of main point is technology has evolved. The manufacturers have been able to make enhancements in terms of how they use the channels and what type of modulation schemes they can get to. And effectively, licensed microwave has moved from a position where, you know, 15 years ago, I remember selling 100 megabit full duplex radios. Now we're having conversations around multi-gigabit solutions. And, you know, I won't go too granular in terms of how we get there, because, you know, many manufacturers, you know, position it different ways, but effectively you hear narrative and terminology around 1+0 single link systems, 1+1, which is effectively a single link system with a hot standby. And now we're starting to hear, you know, terminology of 2+0, 4+0, dual link, quad link, XPIC, many different options available, but ultimately get us to the same position of licensed microwave is now a hardware solution platform that can offer multi-gigabit speeds. And then the fourth thing is, which I would probably highlight the most, and it's probably the reason that we're here, is the no interference, right? This is regulated spectrum. This takes, you know, what you are deploying from a spectrum perspective and creates an asset-based solution versus using something that's unregulated or even unlicensed. And like I mentioned, the reason we're here is the spectrum costs in Canada have now come down to a point where we now understand that deploying licensed microwave in the market is extremely CapEx and business case friendly. You know, the cost, the hardware cost of deploying licensed microwave radios have come down almost exponentially in the last 15 years, where you can effectively get, you know, high capacity systems for under, you know, 14, 15K, and it could be even possibly less than that. Now with the spectrum cost coming down, like I mentioned, it's extremely business case friendly. From a use case perspective, licensed microwave can effectively be used by both network operators, service providers, as well as the VAR and integrator community. And I see we have flavors of both on this call. But, you know, from a service provider perspective, especially those that are kind of working with fiber applications. And in Canada, we have a number of UBF type winners that a lot of these projects are fiber built. But you know, licensed microwave gives you that opportunity to either build out your network or extend and leverage what you have and go out further. You can create long distance LAN connections for enterprise or government customers, or even for your own needs. But effectively, it's a nice tool that's evolved over the years to a nice tool in the tool chest from your network to be able to get yourself into that carrier grade type application and mentality. Moving forward, the next sort of spectrum range that we're seeing more and more opportunity in Canada is the upper frequency range of 70 and 80 gigahertz, which typically is, you know, part of that millimeter wave band and is considered, you know, a multi-gig solution. And, you know, in the US, it gets kind of a few buzzwords, whether it's, you know, last mile gigabit or gigabit to the curb or gigabit to the home. I myself, 5 years ago, used to use a term called gigatize. You know, let's gigatize everything. But, you know, millimeter wave is a very interesting band. Typically, it gets put into this short range, high capacity category. Generally, I would say that, you know, the comfort zone of using a millimeter wave radio is somewhere in that 2 kilometer range. You know, we do have a number of customers that extend that a little bit, but from a, you know, maintain high availability from a rain fade perspective in an unprotected environment, millimeter wave generally gets kind of pigeonholed into that 2 kilometer or less area. One reason why this is such an attractive band is it does have extremely wide channels, which relates into a very, very high capacity applications. You know, traditionally, the first millimeter wave vendors on the market had, you know, 1 or 2 gigabit radio platforms. But now, you know, you're seeing solutions on the market that get you to 5, 10, 20 gigabits per second. And very, very attractive when you're looking at the number of applications and capacity that you can drive over that. The reason why very, very attractive is, you know, these types of radio systems have very, very narrow beam antennas. So if you think of yourself hitchhiking on the street, you put your thumb out and you look at your fingernail, well, that's effectively, you know, the width of the beam width. And because you're only going 1, 2, maybe 3 kilometers, you know, as long as you have line of sight and you can see the other end and you can see your thumbnail, that's how, you know, you generally get, you know, your alignment and connection. And it makes it very ideal for high density deployments. You know, Dave mentioned earlier, New York City over the last 15 years possibly has over 10,000 millimeter wave radios deployed. You know, I myself have done a search for Toronto, you know, in our backyard, and Toronto's got, you know, I know for sure it has hundreds of 80 gig radios deployed across a handful of different operators, but that number maybe even be in the thousands. So it's certainly a nice radio solution for those short range, high capacity applications. And generally with millimeter wave, you know, it becomes a business case analysis versus running fiber, right? It's what if I wanted to run fiber over these last 1 or 2 kilometers, how would how would the business case look versus, possibly paying under $10,000 for a pair of radios at 10 gigabits per second. And that's, generally the number one application is, does it compete with fiber or does it extend fiber? And, the jury's out on which direction it could go, but there's a number of applications that certainly come about when you're looking at, multi-gigabit millimeter wave. And, generally, from an enterprise perspective, you could look at campus environments, whether it's schools, hospitals, municipalities, universities. There's a pretty significant market with Wi-Fi and small cell backhaul that millimeter wave gets used for. And then kind of getting into some larger market applications, right? The big terminology today is safe and smart cities. Millimeter wave is a nice radio solution for both of those. So from a safe city security standpoint, you see a lot of millimeter wave used for video backhaul, CCTV cameras and so forth. In the smart city environment, we're starting to see a growth market of IoT applications and AI driven applications. And effectively, when you're dealing with IoT and sensors and the number of layered on options that you could have, those aggregate bandwidth, and you can't run fiber and you can't connect everything everywhere. So millimeter wave is a nice radio solution for that. And then moving forward, when you're looking at the middle mile, right? And this is a multi-band solution is, a deployment, I would say a deployment strategy that's been around for some time, but, the market is starting to see more and more messaging and solutions and product offerings that get us down that multi-band route. And, effectively what it is, you're creating an opportunity to extend the range of a traditional E-band or millimeter wave radio with multi-gigabit capacity while still maintaining, the path integrity and survivability that you've deployed. And, that this chart kind of simplifies it, right? From 0 to 2 kilometers, you could use an E-band radio, no problem, no questions asked. But what do you do kind of between that 2 and 10 kilometers if you want to offer or have the ability to do multi-gigabit connectivity? Well, using a multi-band solution is certainly is one of the options. You've got a couple, flavors of how you could look at it. And, I would say traditionally some E-band products and messaging and it's called storytelling have said, put up an E-band radio and use a 5 gigahertz unlicensed system to act as its failover. And, if I were to kind of throw out some numbers, like let's say we had a 10-kilometer link, and you threw up an E-band radio at max modulation, well, theoretically, because of rain fade, that path, could possibly fade out, let's call it 2 or 3 hours over the course of the year. It may not be all at once, but, every time it rains, it will blip in and out, which effectively means, your failover point is moving to a 5 gig or any type of unlicensed system that may not have the same type of channel size, will certainly not have the same type of capacity, but you can prioritize your traffic how you want. If you want to have your voice traffic sort of priority 1, that will flow through first. What's come to light and come to fruition is now the ability to say, let's create a multi-band solution using E-band and millimeter wave radios as sort of my primary, but use licensed microwave as my secondary. And this is, we're starting to see more and more of this in the market today. And effectively, because licensed microwave systems can handle the channel size, they can handle the capacity. When you're transferring traffic from an E-band radio to a licensed microwave, you do have somewhat of a hit from a capacity standpoint, but you wouldn't see it as bad as you would with using, a traditional unlicensed system. Or potentially there's a vice versa scenario where, you have a number of operators in the market that have licensed microwave systems that they've had deployed for several years, 1, 2, 300 megabit systems that have been out there running for a long time. They're running perfectly. What about a scenario where you layer on an E-band radio on top of those? You know, you've got your pre-existing path, you know, at the end of that network, at the end of that path, you want to create new opportunities, create new applications, grow your customer base. You can layer on a millimeter wave or an E-band radio on top of those and use the same analogy in a vice versa scenario. You know, but effectively, you know, very similar to how licensed microwave systems can come in a lot of different bells and whistles and a lot of different flavors. We are seeing, you know, manufacturers kind of jump on this opportunity and position themselves in their own, you know, unique ways. But, you know, there's solutions with single radio or dual radio, single antenna, dual antennas. You've got solutions that have integrated switching, creative powering, and cabling options. And at the end of the day, simplified configuration and management. But effectively, what the message is, you know, you do have options to create more carrier grade solutions, whether you're using licensed microwave, millimeter wave, or a combination of both. And that's all I have for this section, and I'll turn it over to Cody again.
All right, thanks, Paul. Good stuff. So now we got Mr. Ryan Tabor. We're going to get into the real meat here on what we're seeing is active now in the license fee structure. So take it away, Mr. Tabor.
All right, thanks, bud. All right, so new ISED or IC licensing structure. So like Cody mentioned, you know, this has been a long time waiting for something like this to happen. You know, originally we were looking at April 2020, you know, probably due to a number of factors going on globally that was pushed back. Luckily, we did see that happen now as of April 1st, 2021, that the new fee structure has come into place. So kind of like how Dave Cullen mentioned, you know, we had a capacity format before where you're paying based on megabit. Now we're really just based on consumption. So, you know, the amount of spectrum you're going to occupy is what you're going to pay. On top of that, you know, not just the amount of spectrum, but it's also is based on the frequency band. So there is a different you know, pay per megabit based on 11, 13, 15 versus 18, 23, and so on and so forth. So the frequency band that is determined does play a factor into, you know, what that fee will look like. Another thing that plays a factor in as well is where it's located. So in Canada anyways, what they've done is they've modeled, you know, the new fee structure based on the tier 5 service areas. And these tier 5 service areas are broken up into urban, remote, or rural. And so based on where these links are, or where, you know, each of the, you know, the endpoints are, will kind of determine what that fee structure also looks like. If you do run into a situation where maybe one of the ends is in an urban area and the other end is in a rural area, you will pretty much have to pay based on the urban rate. If it's the other way around, if it's rural and remote, you actually pay based on remote. So, you know, we can determine, you know, fairly quickly, you know, what tier 5 service area you're in and how it's classified, and help determine obviously what the fee will look like. Some things that really haven't changed though are some of the, you know, the technical requirements. The application still, you know, must be originated by a PE or professional engineer, which has been certified by ISED. An interference study still must be completed. And again, this is important, you know, this is important. I mean, it does add some time and so on and so forth, and maybe even a little bit of cost to, you know, getting the application done. But this is to assure that, you know, you are running in an interference-free environment. And of course, you're not impacting any existing links that are already in place, and nobody's going to impact you. And the criteria around the equipment for each band really hasn't changed as well. So those are kind of the things that have stayed the same. But of course, you know, the fee structure has changed, luckily for us. All right, so kind of talking a little bit, you know, we mentioned urban, rural, remote. Here's just kind of a quick snapshot of what that looks like, and based on the frequency ranges. You know, of course, you know, today we're mostly living in that, you know, say, you know, 8 to 15, 15 to 23 gig, you know, we're definitely upwards in the millimeter wave. We have some opportunities now, even in 32 gig. So based on the frequency that we're, you know, looking to allocate or occupy, you know, will determine kind of the base rate per megahertz. Now, if you look at this and you might ask, well, you know, okay, I'm looking at an 18 gig link. My base rate is $12.80 per megahertz, 50 megahertz channel. well, that equals 640, but unfortunately it doesn't. It's, you do have a pair of channels, or a pair, in transmitting in the upper part of the band and the lower part of the band. So when you get a 50 megahertz channel, you technically get 100 megahertz of spectrum. So, in that case, in an 18 gig link, rural area, you're looking at about 1280 per year, because you have 100 megahertz of spectrum occupied, using a 50 megahertz channel. So that's kind of just a quick screenshot, or kind of quick overview of how those base rates kind of flow through. All right, so what are we looking at then? What are we looking at from a plan perspective? Here's kind of a quick link that's kind of in the southern Alberta area, looking, for an operator that's looking to provide about 1 gig symmetrical capacity or full duplex. Under the old model, using 18 gig, looking at that, close to 1 gig capacity, about 885 megs actually full duplex, we're looking at just under 12K. So I think it was around 11.9 per year. So, the economics, it's really tough to make sense. Do we look at fiber as another option? Sub 6 gig, multiple sub 6 gig links. The problem with, again, what Dave said is that, we run out of spectrum fairly quickly. And also sub 6 gig is a valuable spectrum for multi-point, providing those access services and stuff like that into the customer. So, the more of that spectrum you can claw back, move your backhaul to a microwave or millimeter wave solution, the more beneficial that is, because that means more capacity, more radios possibly that you can look at rolling out into, for the access layer to the customer. So again, under the new ISET scheme, in this case, we're looking at about 1280 per year versus that 12K or just under 12K per year per link. Now, again, granted, the new fee model is not as attractive as the FCC model. FCC model still beats us that way, but it's still significantly better than what we were seeing in the past. So, definitely, things look good going forward. One other thing, Paul kind of mentioned and Dave mentioned it, is things on technology. So we talk about XPIC, we talk about MIMO. What are these things? Well, with the past scheme, you would almost get penalized for using some of these efficiencies that radio manufacturers have come up with. Because again, you're paying based on megabits. So you allocate, you utilize a feature like XPIC, theoretically you're almost doubling your capacity using the same amount of spectrum. Guess what? You're still paying more for that link, unfortunately, even though you're occupying the same amount of spectrum. So it didn't really give you any advantage to look at a carrier grade solution that offered some of these features like XPIC, because, you're going to have to pay more for it anyway. The second thing was that a lot of operators would use a less efficient radio and then just license a second channel. Well, I'm going to license 250 megahertz channels or 200 megahertz of spectrum to give me that, capacity that I want, because I'm going to pay for it anyway. So, it didn't really promote any, any efficiencies that a lot of these radio manufacturers come up with, in technologies. So luckily now it does. And again, the less spectrum you can occupy, the more bits per hertz, or more we can cram through that radio, you're not going to have to pay any more for that. One too far here. So here's a kind of just another quick snippet of a typical 18 or 23 gig link. We do have some, spectrum or channel size limitations in these bands, so up to 50 megahertz today. So that's where we look at using XPIC, or even 4+, so multiple channels with XPIC to give us a really high capacity. Looking at multi-core solutions, pushing 885 megs full duplex across this link as an example. Using a single core option in this case, I'm using the 820S or 820C as a comparison. The single core option, we're paying the same amount as far as spectrum, or far of a fee model, but really we're losing about 0.5% or capacity because it doesn't support a feature like XPIC. So same licensing cost, obviously, definitely save on the hardware cost, but don't get access to some of these efficiencies you would see in a dual carrier type solution. All right, oops. All right, so here's another kind of an example. This is a little bit of a longer link, actually using the CI Alpha +2. using an 80 megahertz channel, pushing close to that 1.3, 1.4 gigabits full duplex, at max modulation. Again, depending on the path, depending on how many other broadcasters are in the area, is really going to kind of determine what that frequency looks like. A lot of people come to me and say, I want to do 11 gigahertz link. Well, let's look at the path first. Let's look at the distance of the link. I mean, if it's just as feasible to do this in, say, 15, 18, or 23 gig, the licensing process, which Matt will get into it a little bit, is going to be a lot easier typically, because there's just usually less broadcasters in that spectrum. Again, rain fade and stuff like that will definitely play a higher factor into those upper bands. But if we can still get the availability, in one of those frequencies where we want it, at least, say 5 nines at lowest mode, if maybe 4 nines at what you're looking at offering, then, definitely something to look forward to. And the second benefit, of course, is, it's going to cost you less. 11 gigahertz link, occupying 11 or even 11, 13 or 15, occupying the same amount of spectrum is going to cost you more than an 18 or 23 would. So if we can do it in a higher frequency, that's usually the first place we'll look or try to do. All right. Got another snippet here, and this is just to kind of provide some shock value. And I know Dave Cullen had a table like this as well, looking at some of the fee structures, from the old versus the new. So, just really quickly, I created one here with an 80 gig solution using 2000 megahertz channels, doing 9.491 gigabits, and that's full duplex. Old fee model, we're looking at just under 125,000 a year, not doable. New fee model around $2,000 a year. Now that same link, doing it, maybe you only need 1.5 gigs or something like that. Now we're looking at fees in an urban area of around $400 a year, because we'd only have to, chew up 250 megahertz of spectrum. And again, the radios are capable of doing all these things. So it's definitely more as a pay-as-you-grow model a lot of times in the E-band, because you can look at occupying more spectrum in the future if you need to get the additional capacity. 11 gigahertz example here as well, 80 megahertz, actually 80 megahertz channels just, recently, became available in the last couple of years, where they looked at 60 and 80, adding it to the channel plan. So depending on the area, how congested it is, 80 megahertz could be an option. And again, kind of in that urban setting, doing an 80 or 11 gigahertz link with an 80 megahertz channel in, Calgary, Toronto, something that's, obviously going to be congested. If we can do it, old model would have been around 17.5. Now we're looking at about 38.40. And I have some other examples as well on 18 gig, just under, for the 40 megahertz channel, 9.5 versus $1,000. And then again, I kind of talked about the 250 megahertz channel in the rural area, about, $400 in urban, $200 in a rural area. So, E-band is obviously, I think, going to be, a popular option, assuming we can get the availability where we need it to be, just because it's very high capacity, and the fee structure, fee model, really does complement it. And that's it for me. Thanks, everybody. Matt,
all right, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, Matt, you're up to cover off the licensing process. Just also worth noting for our attendees that Matt is a certified engineer and does licensing applications all day long. You take it away, Matt.
Okay, take this. All right. So ways to make an application move quicker. So as Ryan mentioned, practicing in BC, practicing in Alberta or Saskatchewan, you can still actually do licensing across Canada. What's important to find is a guy who's very familiar with the wireless environment, in particular the standard radio system plans for the bands that you're in. And every band, of course, has one, and they're constantly being updated. So you have to be very much on the forefront of those plans and be very fluent with them. That goes back to your planning process, which feeds into this slide. When you plan a link, make sure you have enough data rate, not just a low amount of data rate, and make sure you have antennas and installation plans that would meet the standard radio system plans, which folks like Ryan are also very fluent with. Now, so some of the things I've seen in the last couple of years that have bitten applications getting through quickly. So on rooftops and that kind of things in particular, but even on some tower sites, this does come into play, is to design, make sure you place your antennas so it complies with safety code 6. And if there's a risk of that, then as an engineer, I'd have to cite the risk, and then I would delay the application until we can rejig some of the installation drawings. The land use approval. So there's a few things that can help there. If the tower itself is less than 15 meters, it doesn't require land use approval. If you can use a pre-existing structure, that also doesn't need land use approval. Or if you keep an attachment less than 25% of additional height on a tower or structure, that also doesn't need land use approval. Now, land use approval, of course, is important for an application because without it, the frequency application will not be approved. And ISED is very careful about that. I've even seen some of the ISED approvers going so far as to consult on a carrier tower, the carrier themselves, to say, were you guys aware of this change? And that's independent of me submitting the application. I presume that some of that would have been done by the company that wants to co-locate. But ISED, they're very familiar with the carriers, and especially with offices in the different areas. They will fact check some of that stuff with the bigger carriers. I think, and guys like TELUS, probably Sportnet. All right, next slide. And if anybody has questions, just let me know, chat window or otherwise. Okay, so we mentioned a bit of these. So application delays, we talked about the land use approval. We also talked about safety code 6. So when you're around the Toronto area, and if you're around some of the border areas in Canada, as you start getting within 120 kilometers of the US border, and that does vary by jurisdiction, and it also varies a little bit by topography, you do have to coordinate with the states. Now, what you'll do is you'll make sure the frequencies themselves are compliant to SRSPs. You also, sometimes you have to do some diligence on the FCC requirements if you're getting very close to the border. You also might want to get a bit cozy with some of the frequency coordinators that are across the border. The states run it a little bit different. They actually have coordinators that you go to, and they're very rigid on their structure in the United States, but they're also pretty easy to work with. So what will happen though is you'll submit the application, and then ISED will do a spectrum clearance review with FCC on whether that frequency is allowed. They also have access to information we don't. I didn't mention it in here, but if we're close to a first responder use, then they will also have insight into that we may or may not know. Some of that times you only get the insight just based on experience. Near far issues. So I've seen this happen recently in the just east of Toronto, the little area there. Ran into a near far issue. If you're going to place your equipment on a water tower or structure with lots of existing point-to-points, then you have to make sure you pick the right high-low frequency for that point on the tower. If you start to match a high-low frequency and it is the same high-low pairing that's in the same band on that structure, then ISED will ask you to coordinate with that person, which will cause delay, especially if they're a rival. It's best just to avoid that by doing the right high-low pairing before you submit the application. Coordination with broadcasters, that happens a few times. I've never seen them kick it back, but every now and then you'll get within 2 kilometers of a broadcast station. The big guys like Patterson, and then
Did we lose Matt, or did I drop?
No, I think we lost him.
Okay. Okay, well, I guess we'll, Nicole, could you give me control? I could go into my section and we can allow Matt to come back, and we could circle back just so we don't sit here sitting on our hands. So I'll do our wrap up section here. We'll wait for Matt to jump back on. Hopefully it's just a blip in his internet, but so MBSI Wave, so just kind of wrapping things up. So on the licensed microwave side, what is our value add as a distributor? Well, again, we're not just the box pushers. We don't want to just sell you a box with a number stamped on it. We want to take you from, even your ideas to, early designs and taking you all the way to deployment and that post-sale support. So obviously the network planning is a huge value add that we bring. Both Ryan and Dave Clellan, they literally do thousands of designs a year. They can make recommendations on frequency, architecture. They can walk you through what we're going to be looking at for licensing fees potentially. Ryan's made some nice tools there as well. Again, that pre-sale support, so any kind of configuration staging that you need done, we've done this for a few clients that, maybe they just want to have the radios upgraded as soon as they, as soon as they get to their dock, everything's ready to go. We can absolutely help you there as well. Licensing applications. So we do have some connections that we can take an order for a licensing application and run that right to the very end. So we can handle every aspect. The technical training. Now, this is a very nice piece. So it is private. You can make it private, customizable. It can be certification based. We're going to have a little bit more on the training options on another slide. So just hang tight there. The knowledge base, we've really studied this new fee structure, as you can tell, hopefully from our session here. But we can, like I said, Ryan's made some real nice tools. He can plug some numbers in and give you a pretty good estimate right up front. Options. So lots of pricing incentives. This is a big, hot topic right now up here in Canada because it's, we're going to see a surge of new microwave links going out there. There's some pretty competitive and attractive numbers being thrown around. If you've previously been talking to us about some products and maybe you've seen some better pricing from somewhere else since then, please allow us to come back. We will not be defeated there. So, by all means, we'd love to re-engage if we've engaged with you previously, or, just carry on what we've been doing. So those are just some of the value adds on the licensed microwave side. Just waiting for my slide to switch here. All right, so I don't think I went too many. Okay. So our point-to-point license options. So again, we're not doing the sales pitch here, but just so everybody's aware, obviously Cambium Networks has been a part of our portfolio for quite some time. Looks like Matt's jumping back on, so we'll get it back to him. I'll just finish up here. Sorry. So Cambium Networks, yes, been a part of our portfolio for a number of years. We've also recently brought on CI as well, which is another extremely attractive option. They've been around for many years, and again, every frequency is covered: 11, 13, 15, 18, 23, 32, 80, and even some other frequencies that aren't as common. Hi Matt, welcome back. We are going to circle back to you. I just picked it up, so hang tight, man. So just some more MBSI Wave. What else do we bring to the table? Again, this training, so it's not just on the licensed microwave side. We can do multiple manufacturers, different solutions, whether it's traditional multi-point, Wi-Fi, switching, LTE based. We can basically do it all. Certification and non-certification options are available, and we can completely customize sessions for your organization and their specific needs. So if you want to do multiple products, maybe if you want to focus on a specific piece of a product, whatever it is, let us know and we can tailor that for you. Boot camps, interactive sessions, virtual certifications, online workshops, things of that sort. We're continuously doing those in all different areas. I do have an upcoming events slide to show. There are a couple, but there's going to be, that's going to be a consistent thing that we're bringing to the table. Tech Talk. So this is, I'd mentioned at the beginning, this is our very first special edition Tech Talk, which spun off of a monthly session that Dave Clellan does. These are, again, they happen every third Wednesday of the month, I believe is the target. And all of the previous sessions Dave has done are on our YouTube channel. They're tailored for the very technical folks. It's not a sales presentation. It's extremely technical. We encourage our customers, their field techs, their engineers, whomever, If there's some valuable information there, which there is, please hop on those sessions. And if you have any ideas for Tech Talks, topics you'd like to see covered, et cetera, let us know. We're all ears, and we'd love to. Yeah, Dave's given the thumbs up. We'd absolutely love to tailor some stuff for what customers want to see. Won't spend a lot of time here. Just some upcoming virtual sessions. So again, that Tech Talk. We do have a Telrad cert training course. We have some enterprise Wi-Fi workshop, and then we have some 820 certification as well. Again, this schedule, this calendar continues to build, right? So there's going to be more and more filling as time goes on. And actually, we'll go back to Matt here. I'll just get you back to where you were, and we can do. I think we were here. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah, I'll start over on this slide.
All right, take it away, bud.
All right, can you all hear me okay? Right. So the things that can delay applications, I'll start this slide over again just because I'm not sure how much you heard before I cut out. So again, we talked about the LUA approval being necessary and the steps to allow that easier. The US border, of course, when you're within 120 kilometers of the US border, the rules start to change a bit, and we do have to coordinate with our neighbors. And that number does change a little bit as you go across Canada. What will happen is you might not see all of the frequencies, both either in the United States or even in the ones in Canada, especially if you're using a band that's controlled by Public Safety Canada or first responders. So the ISET folks will take your frequency. They'll actually do a scrutiny on both the cross-border potential for interference, and they'll look at the potential for interference with any first responders. And then they might come back to you. Then you'll have to talk to those folks almost directly to get more details from them and their unique requirements. Near-far issues. So if you co-locate on water towers or structures with lots of pre-existing point-to-points, you have to be aware of what high-low pairing you're using for your point-to-point. So if you're on a high frequency and that location has lots of high frequencies already within your band, you may have to either swap your frequencies or do some shielding on site or placement on site to minimize that. And that can cause a delay, especially if you've already created design drawings and you spent good money on them. You might have to reduce some of that work. So it's an important thing to clarify prior to going too far down the design road. Broadcasters, this happens actually fairly frequently, surprisingly, where you have a broadcast antenna within a couple kilometers of the point-to-point you're trying to put in. Even though it happens frequently, I've never seen an application kick back from a broadcaster saying that we're causing interference. Our point-to-points are typically quite a ways away from harming a broadcaster. So it's just a matter of coordinating with them, folks like Pattison and so on. If we can get to the next slide. Okay, so to actually do a process, you do need to register with ISET, yourself, your company. So to do that, there's a login details there for you. You can just log in direct and set yourself up. I'm an agent, so as a practicing engineer, I would request access to your new account that you would have set up. So I would send you a letter of authorization, so I'm allowed to act as your advocate. And MBSI has all this information. The biggest qualification you need for an engineering side of things, of course, make sure your engineer knows the SRSPs very well, and if possible, has had significant experience with ISET and the different region that you're working in and the particulars about that. Bands themselves become critical. If you start playing at the more low frequency bands, they have very unique requirements, and some of those requirements go back 20 or 30 years, and there's reasons why they're put in play. So it's important to be aware of why that happened. The higher bands, not so much. 15, 11, 18, those ones, they're very well-used bands with very well understood requirements. So I don't see a lot of issues there. Now, depending on how well you set up your design and prepared the band that you worked in, then the application can take anywhere from 1 to 10 weeks to process. You do have to be careful not submitting too soon and start putting your request for request for frequency 3 months or more out, they will kick that back to saying either delay the application or to change your date. As well, make sure, one thing I should mention here too is they won't allow all frequencies to be used for all distances of point to point. So when we do an application, what thing to vet is, have you selected a frequency that's suitable for the length of link that you're trying to put in play? And I think that's it.
All right, thanks, Matt. Okay, I will just get back to where I was in the wrap up here, and then we can get to our Q&A. I think, oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you mentioned the Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. This is where I left off, I think. Yeah, so just, getting in touch, obviously, just some, sales, technical support, marketing, accounting, etc. Obviously you have all your sales rep, the technical support here at MBSI Wave. So just feel free to reach out however you feel, most comfortable. There's all our social media outlets as well. Nicole does a fantastic job of, keeping the latest and greatest up, posted everywhere. And again, any suggestions, ideas, you want to connect with us, please do, by all means. All right, so it is question time, and I've seen a couple of questions be asked and then addressed already in the chat there. So, but I think probably worth at least, rereading and maybe just getting that information out. Just bear with me here. Okay. So here's one question. Is there any cost savings if you are able to upgrade license links by keeping the existing installed antennas in place? Who wants to chime in there?
Well, I can chime in for sure. So yeah, definitely for sure. I mean, the cost savings, the cost savings would really benefit, the fact that, you're not replacing the hardware, or not replacing the antenna itself, obviously, but I mean, of course, the tower rigging costs and things like that to remove that old antenna and take it down. So depending on what the type of, or what antenna is currently there. So say maybe it's it's an older Dragon Wave link or something like that. Most of our manufacturers have, the ability to convert those antennas. Maybe it's a radio waves or a CommScope antenna. There's actually conversion kits that we can actually replace or use to replace the existing interface to marry up with like, a CI or an 820S or 820C. So there's definitely a benefit that way. Yeah, and then the only other thing would be to look at, if you're looking to upgrade an existing link, and replace the radios themselves, is the antenna itself that's currently in place going to meet the availability and capacity requirements? Definitely in a lot of situations, still a higher gain solution or higher gain antenna will provide you with more margin. And then, so those rain events, those fading events will not, hit you as hard. So we would also look at that. We could do a plan with the existing and a plan with a potential upgrade or changing out the antenna. Now, if you have another antenna that has a remote or, an interface that you typically or connect today with waveguide, again, that's another thing we can do. CI and also 820 have a remote mount kit. So instead of direct mounting the radio to the antenna, we could connect it up via waveguide and do it that way as well. So, definitely, reach out if you have an existing system and we can take a look at all those things.
Lots of different ways to skin that cat, I think.
For sure. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so regarding licensing, it says, does the end user pay the fees directly to Industry Canada? I said, or is there an option for a value-added reseller to pay, or an entity in the middle that could pay that on behalf of the end user? Matt, would that be maybe in your court?
Yeah, I've seen that a few ways. So the end user, of course, will get the invoice direct. And before, if I do a new application, the invoice will go to the client. The client has to pay the invoice before it's official. Before they actually get fully assigned that point to point. Now that application can be paid by someone else. I have seen that happen. I don't know the mechanics to actually make that happen. As an agent though, I can look at an invoice for any of my clients. And if they say we have an invoice come in, then I can look it up. I can I can look to pay it. I actually haven't tried paying that direct, but I don't think that would be something that would not be doable.
Okay, great. Thanks, Matt. Okay, next question. And this might be Ryan, Dave. In an XPIC scenario, is the license fee based on 2 TX and 2 RX channels as the V and H are on the same channel?
Under the new model, it is not, so you're, in an XPIC scenario, you're really occupying, or allocating one 50 meg, or, say transmit high and one transmit low, not 2. If you're doing the link using ACCP or ACAP, then yes. But if you're using XPIC, the benefit of XPIC is for sure is transmission on both vertical and horizontal polarities. So you're only occupying the same amount of spectrum. So, your fee does not change. So, if I had a multi-core dual carrier radio running XPIC, doubling my capacity versus a single carrier radio not running XPIC, my fee technically would be the same. My capacity is obviously going to be considerably less. So that's definitely a major benefit of, using a technology like XPIC, is to increase the capacity without occupying more spectrum, and of course, paying a higher rate.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Ryan. Okay, so we got another one here. This is regarding the license fees. So I'm just going to kind of softball this one up. In the case of upgrading an existing license link, does ISED have a modification of the license or licenses, the licensing fees, or would they just buy the new fees that were presented like they were buying a new link? So I think it's we're looking at, if we're upgrading an existing system, how does that licensing work? Is it kind of, do you start directly from scratch, or is it kind of a transition period? Did you guys know that? It's a good question.
Well, one thing I did notice in January this year, I could go on the accounts of my various clients and actually give them updates on what their fee is going to be. I said put a tool out there to show them the fee reductions. I haven't followed up since it came into play this month what their new invoice was. But my expectation is any grandfathered links under the old fee structure would have the new fee structure immediately April 1st this year.
That sounds, yeah, that sounds like it's the way it should be, but that's not always the case, right?
That is my understanding as well. For some operators that did get some of the, had pre-existing links that, under the old fee model, that the new fee model was on their latest invoice. So there was no process to, try to, rebate or get, migrate to the new fee structure. It was done automatically, is what I've been told. So.
Okay. Thank you, gents.
But further to that question, someone had a similar question last November, operating out of BC, and they really wanted to upgrade the capacity on their links. They just weren't sure how to do it. And now the option comes in to actually look at, you don't need to worry about paying more for that high data rate. Maybe go back to the license you currently have and see if you can expand the bandwidth as much as possible. Yeah, I don't know if that was part of the context of the previous question, but that kind of a thing came up last year.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that.
Good point. Thanks, Matt.
All right, so we got another one. This is another one I'm gonna softball up. This might be more in your wheelhouse, Matt, but we will see. Is the consultation with the LUA triggered at tower construction only, or the addition of a new link? If the LUA has been consulted at construction and the tower is operating with unlicensed equipment and then moved to licensed backhaul, what happens? Well,
that's a gray area. I have actually put point-to-points on towers that I found out afterwards to not, we're just there for 5 years. No formal LUA process had been followed, but they had been there so long, it didn't really matter. Now, putting up a new tower right now, it's 83 meters, and that's triggered at construction. And so what I'm doing with that one is 3 new point-to-points, and I have to tell them that the tower is approved, but it's a new construction. So I'm trying to get a jump on that. So we actually applied for the frequencies, of course, because you know they're high risk. We have a super long haul on one of them, over 50 clicks, and we want to secure the high bandwidth on that before it goes away. So I submitted it early. I still have 15 days on my 30-day public consult period. The LUA themselves have accepted it, but you have two criteria, right? Under CPC 2-0-03, you have to have that LUA acceptance and the public consultation acceptance. And I said, when you apply for frequencies, you have to check mark both boxes. So on this one, we do have the LUA, but I don't have the public consult done. But I did say, hey, in 15 days, it's going to be done. And what they responded back with is, we will approve this, but you cannot mount any equipment until that consultation is completed.
Good answer. Very detailed. Real life experience, right?
Real life, yeah, exactly.
I think that's it. If we haven't addressed anybody's question that you had, to the detail that you want, please let us know. We can always follow up afterwards. I know we've gone over time here a little bit today, but yeah, I think we're ready to wrap up. So again, big thank you to everybody who attended. I know we had a few drop off because we did go over time, which is totally fine. We will be sharing this again on our social media. So if you want to share this recording, by all means, we will be sharing that link with all the attendees today. And again, Tech Talk is a regular monthly session that Mr. Clellan puts together. Any feedback, comments, new topic suggestions, please do email them to marketing@mbsiwave.com or your sales rep. Whoever your contact is over here. And also, just another caveat here as we close up, we've been kind of spitballing a couple of ideas to do another special edition Tech Talk, potentially around the new 60 gig technology. So the 802.11ay and, the advanced network planning and things that go around all of that. So if that's something that interests our attendees, by all means, let us know, because that's something that we are considering putting together. Again, thanks a lot for your time. Any questions, comments, please let us know. Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate your time as always. And I guess we will sign off. So thank you, everybody.